Stop scrolling. This changes everything. For years, we were shown one version of the story. A quiet daughter. A peaceful house. A family that, at least on the surface, still worked. But what if that image was never real? What if the most obedient person in that home wasn't loyal, just trapped? Something surfaced briefly online last week. So briefly that most people missed it. A post appeared, caused instant panic, and then vanished like it was never meant to be seen. But it was seen. And what it described points to a collapse happening from inside the house itself. This isn't Kody versus Christine anymore. It isn't Kody versus Yanel. This time, the threat is much closer. This time, it's personal. A now deleted post claimed a legal case exists in Arizona that no one expected. A case allegedly tied to a child who grew up on camera. A child whose earnings may never have belonged to her. A child who stayed silent for years while watching everyone else walk away with nothing. And now, that silence may be over. For nearly 2 decades, viewers were conditioned to believe that Robyn's children were different. They followed the rules. They didn't rebel. They didn't challenge authority. While the original kids built lives outside the family, these ones stayed inside the system. But that story cracked wide open the moment someone online dropped a single detail that couldn't be explained away. The post didn't read like gossip. It didn't sound emotional. It was clinical, legal, specific. It described a young woman seeking advice about money earned as a minor on a long-running reality show. Not inheritance. Not gifts. Earned income. Money that should have followed her into adulthood, but didn't. Within minutes, the post disappeared. Not edited. Not retracted. Erased. That alone raised alarms. Then came the detail that made people stop breathing. The post referenced land. Specific land. Property connected to Coyote Pass. And a name no one expected to see connected to a legal fight. Aurora. Think about the last time you saw her on screen. The cameras frame her as anxious, withdrawn, fragile. But go back and watch again. Watch her eyes when loyalty is mentioned, when obedience is praised, when submission is demanded. That isn't fear. That's absence. That's someone mentally leaving the room. That's someone counting days. The claim is that while chaos exploded between wives, someone else was paying attention, listening, watching, gathering. While Kody fought public battles, he may have ignored the quiet presence in the background. The one who heard phone calls. The one who saw paperwork. The one who lived in the house built with money she helped earn. The allegation is simple and devastating. Earnings from years of filming were pooled, controlled, spent, but never protected. No trust. No account. No safety net. Instead, the money allegedly became part of a shared pot controlled by the same 2 people whose names appear on nearly every asset. If even a fraction of that is true, the numbers are staggering. A decade of filming. Network contracts. Renewals. Inflation. Residual value. That isn't pocket change. That's life-altering money. And yet, the story goes that when Aurora allegedly asked to step out on her own, not extravagantly, not rebelliously, she was told there was nothing for her. No access. No funds. No independence. That moment matters. Because that's when control becomes visible. Financial dependence is a leash. If you can't leave, you can't speak. If you can't pay for help, you can't fight back. And allegedly, that realization changed everything. Around the same time, something else happened quietly. Property records began shifting. Names moved. Deeds adjusted. Loans secured. The explanation given publicly was fairness, balance, planning. But behind the scenes, the claim is that leverage was being created, and that a daughter's future stake was dangled, then pulled away. If a person's identity or implied ownership was used to secure assets without consent, that isn't family conflict. That's legal exposure. It would also explain the sudden paranoia, the obsession with loyalty, the fear of betrayal. Because when the books open, everything is exposed. There's also the question of why now? Why would someone who had always complied suddenly push back? The answer may lie in what she watched happen to others. Wives leaving with empty hands. Children cut off. Promises broken. futures erased. When you see enough people walk away with nothing, you start asking where the money actually went. And then there's the moment that looked sweet to viewers but feels very different in hindsight. The ear-piercing scene. Presented as bonding. Framed as love. But context changes meaning. When someone who spent years banning autonomy suddenly orchestrates it on camera, it stops being about jewelry. It becomes a display. A message. Ownership disguised as affection. Behind the scenes, the claim is that this moment wasn't empowerment, it was performance. A storyline designed to soften an image while tightening control once the cameras stopped. And then came the document. According to the allegation, instead of celebration, a legal agreement was presented. Silence in writing. Restrictions. Permanent consequences. A demand that the truth never leave the house. That's when everything broke. The story says she didn't scream. She didn't beg. She didn't collapse. She refused. What followed was not calm discussion. It was rage. Accusations. Guilt. Emotional warfare. Trauma dragged back into the room and weaponized. But the refusal stood. Days later, something appeared near the property late at night. A rented truck. Not movers. Not planned. Quick. Quiet. Necessary. People don't leave mansions at midnight unless they have to. And that may be the most important part of this entire story. Because once someone is physically gone, the power dynamic collapses. There's no daily pressure. No isolation. No control. And once distance exists, truth follows. The final claim is the most dangerous one of all. That conversations were recorded. That admissions exist. That Arizona law allows it. And that once those recordings are played in a courtroom, there's no editing, no narrative spin, no confessional couch to hide behind. If this case moves forward, every dollar gets traced. Every asset examined. Every excuse tested under oath. This isn't about rebellion. It's about accountability. For years, the story was that loyalty kept the family together. But loyalty without protection is exploitation. And silence doesn't mean consent. The quiet daughter may not have been weak. She may have been waiting. And now, the people who built an empire on control are facing the one thing they never prepared for. A child who knows the truth, has nothing left to lose, and is finally ready to speak. This isn't the end of the story. It's the beginning of the reckoning. Stop everything for a second. What you are about to hear is not a rumor, not a fan theory, and not just another messy family argument. This is the kind of story that only comes out when someone inside the house finally decides they've had enough. For years, we were shown a version of this family that felt controlled, rehearsed, and carefully edited. One child in particular was framed as quiet, obedient, and harmless. But silence doesn't always mean loyalty. Sometimes, it means survival. A few nights ago, something surfaced online that wasn't meant to last. A post appeared, caused immediate panic, and then vanished almost as fast as it arrived. It wasn't corrected. It wasn't debated. It was wiped. That alone tells you everything you need to know. People don't rush to erase lies. They rush to erase threats. The post wasn't emotional or dramatic. It read like something written by someone who knew exactly what they were talking about. Legal language. Financial details. Timelines. It described a young woman who had spent most of her childhood working on a reality television show, asking questions about money she earned while she was still a minor. Not gifts. Not allowances. Earned income. Income that should have followed her into adulthood, but apparently never did. Then came the name that no one expected to see connected to something like this. Aurora. Think about how she has been portrayed over the years. Nervous. Withdrawn. Soft-spoken. Someone who always stayed close, never challenged authority, never stepped out of line. But what if that image was misunderstood? What if that wasn't weakness at all? What if it was someone learning when to stay quiet and when to remember everything? In homes where power is loud, the quiet ones often notice the most. The allegation suggests that while public battles played out between adults, something else was happening behind closed doors. Money from years of filming was being collected, managed, and spent under a system that left certain people completely dependent. There were no separate accounts, No protected funds. No safety net waiting when childhood ended. Everything flowed into one place, under one set of hands. And when the question was finally asked, what belongs to me? The answer wasn't numbers. It was control. That's where the tone of this story changes. Because when a young adult asks for access to their own earnings so they can start an independent life, and they're told that money doesn't exist, that isn't discipline. That isn't protection. That is containment. Financial dependence is one of the most effective ways to keep someone from leaving, from speaking, from pushing back. And then there's the land. Coyote Pass wasn't just a dream. It wasn't just a storyline. According to what was briefly revealed, it may have been leverage. Names connected. Promises implied. Futures discussed and then quietly rewritten. If someone's expected inheritance or stake was used to secure loans or stability without their informed consent, that's not family planning. That's exploitation. Suddenly, a lot of recent behavior starts to make sense. The obsession with loyalty. The constant talk about betrayal. The fear of people turning against each other. Because loyalty isn't demanded unless someone is afraid of what happens when it disappears. This is the moment where the old narrative breaks. The idea that compliance meant happiness. The belief that staying quiet meant being safe. What if the most obedient child wasn't protected at all? What if she was simply the last one to realize the door had been locked from the outside? And this is only the beginning. Because if even part of this is true, then the story isn't about a family falling apart. It's about how long the truth was buried, who benefited from that silence, and why the person everyone underestimated may be the one who finally forces it into the light. Once the illusion cracks, everything you thought was normal starts to look disturbing. Moments that once felt awkward suddenly feel calculated. Scenes that were edited as sweet begin to feel staged, even transactional. And when you look back with new eyes, one thing becomes impossible to ignore: control was never slipping. It was tightening. For years, the public was shown a child who seemed fragile, overwhelmed by the world, grateful for protection. But what if that fragility was misread? What if what we were watching was someone dissociating in real time? Someone learning to disappear emotionally because speaking up wasn't safe. Watch the later seasons again. When loyalty is praised, her face doesn't light up. When obedience is demanded, she doesn't argue, she shuts down. That isn't agreement. That's someone waiting for the moment when survival no longer depends on silence. Behind the scenes, the claim is that evidence was being quietly collected. Not dramatically, not recklessly, slowly. Living inside the house meant hearing every late-night argument, every tense phone call, every conversation about money that wasn't meant for her ears. While the adults were busy fighting visible wars, they may have forgotten to guard the quiet spaces. The financial picture, as it's being alleged, is where everything turns toxic. For years, payments from the show didn't go to individuals. They went into a shared structure, controlled by the same two people who held authority over every aspect of daily life. That setup required absolute trust, and trust, once broken, becomes dangerous. According to what briefly surfaced online, there was no protected account waiting when childhood ended. No clear record of what belonged to whom. The money wasn't preserved for independence or education. Instead, it was absorbed into assets that remain under someone else's name. Homes, land, comfort, security, just not for the person who helped earn it. And that's when the emotional shift reportedly happened. The story goes that when she finally asked to step out on her own, the response wasn't support. It was resistance. Fear wrapped in guilt. Independence framed as betrayal. The message was clear. Leaving meant losing everything. Staying meant safety, as long as obedience continued. That's not parenting. That's leverage. Control doesn't always look like anger. Sometimes it looks like concern. Sometimes it sounds like warnings about how dangerous the outside world is. Sometimes it comes with tears and claims of sacrifice. But the outcome is the same. You don't go anywhere, and you don't ask questions. And then there was the moment everyone remembers for the wrong reason. What appeared on screen as a tender father-daughter outing takes on a very different meaning when you remove the music and the editing. For years, autonomy had strict limits. Rules were rigid. Boundaries were non-negotiable. And suddenly, one rule was broken, publicly, on camera. That wasn't freedom. That was permission being granted for show. A demonstration of power disguised as affection. A reminder of who decides when growing up is allowed. According to the theory circulating now, that moment didn't strengthen loyalty. It shattered it. Because once you realize your autonomy exists only when it benefits someone else's image, you understand exactly where you stand. What followed was not immediate rebellion. It was distance. Quiet preparation. A realization that the future being promised might never arrive unless it was taken. And this is where fear enters the picture. Because when someone inside a system starts pulling away emotionally, starts asking careful questions, starts noticing patterns, the system reacts. Suddenly, loyalty is demanded louder. Submission is praised harder. Silence is rewarded. And anything that threatens the structure becomes dangerous. By this point, the person who was once seen as harmless may have become the greatest risk of all. Not because she was loud, but because she knew too much. And if this version of events is even close to accurate, then the people in control didn't just sense change, they panicked. Because once awareness replaces dependence, control has an expiration date. And what comes next is the point of no return. By the time fear shows itself, it's already too late to stop what's coming. The shift wasn't loud. It wasn't public. It happened in the quiet moments when questions stopped being innocent and started becoming precise. When someone inside the house stopped asking for permission and started asking for proof. That's when control turns into panic. According to what's circulating now, the response wasn't reassurance. It was escalation. The atmosphere inside the home reportedly changed almost overnight. Conversations became monitored. Trust evaporated. Every movement felt watched. Because when someone knows where the money went, where the documents are, and who signed what, silence is no longer guaranteed. This is where the story stops being emotional and starts becoming legal. The claim is that a document was presented quietly, framed as standard, protective, and necessary. Not a celebration. Not a gift. A contract. Words on paper meant to outlive relationships, memories, even family bonds. A promise of silence in exchange for continued safety. That moment matters more than anything else. Because you don't hand someone a gag agreement unless you're afraid of what they might say. The allegation is that the document wasn't explained, it was expected to be signed. Trust was assumed. Obedience was assumed. History suggested compliance. But something had already changed. Instead of agreeing, she asked for time. Instead of trusting, she asked questions. Instead of submitting, she hesitated. That hesitation detonated everything. What followed, according to those familiar with the situation, wasn't calm discussion. It was emotional warfare. Accusations of betrayal. Old wounds dragged into the open. Gratitude demanded. Guilt weaponized. The message was clear: loyalty meant silence, and silence meant survival. But the refusal stood. And once that line was crossed, there was no going back. Here's the part that should make everyone uncomfortable. The fear wasn't about feelings. It wasn't about embarrassment. It was about exposure. Because by that point, the belief was that conversations had already been documented. That statements had been captured. That admissions existed in a form that couldn't be edited or spun away. In certain states, recording your own conversations is legal. And if someone inside the house understood that, then every raised voice, every angry confession, every slip of truth suddenly became evidence. That's when the house stopped feeling safe. Not for the person leaving, for the people losing control. And then came the move no one expected. Late at night. No announcement. No goodbye tour. No dramatic exit. Just motion. Boxes. A rented truck. A decision executed quietly, quickly, and without negotiation. People don't leave like that unless staying has become unbearable. That departure changes everything. Because once someone is physically gone, the pressure collapses. There's no daily intimidation. No emotional recalibration. No chance to talk it out behind closed doors. Distance creates clarity, and clarity creates action. From that moment on, This stopped being a family issue. It became a paper trail. Accounts, assets, ownership, timelines. Every dollar suddenly mattered. Every explanation had to make sense. Every story told on camera could now be compared to reality. And here's the detail that turns this into a nightmare scenario for anyone who thought silence was guaranteed. Once legal counsel enters the picture, emotions don't matter. Love doesn't matter. History doesn't matter. Only facts do. If even a fraction of what's being alleged is verified, then everything becomes vulnerable. Properties, companies, reputations, years of carefully controlled narrative reduced to math that doesn't lie. This is why the quiet has been so loud. No denials, no public outrage, no emotional defenses, just absence. And absence, in moments like this, usually means strategy. Because when the truth is no longer locked inside the house, the only move left is damage control. And this story hasn't reached its climax yet. Because once lawyers start asking questions under oath, once financial records are opened, once timelines are reconstructed, there's only one direction this can go: forward. And the people who believed they were untouchable may soon learn that the most dangerous person in the room was never the loudest one. It was the one who waited.